Morning, everyone. Welcome to APTA's 43rd Legislative Conference. I'm Jeff Wharton, Chair of APTA's Business Member Board of Governors. I'm also president of two of Berkshire Hathaway's manufacturing businesses, Impulse in North Carolina and Kohler Brightstar in Pennsylvania. This is the 16th year for the Business Member-sponsored breakfast, and it's our way of welcoming you to this conference and assisting in the policy discussions. Over the years, we've been joined by a growing roster of distinguished speakers and guests who have helped us understand the larger political landscape and an insider's perspective in which our issues will be considered. This year is no exception. There are few people who have the level of insight and experience working with Democratic and Republican political leaders to advance our nation's transportation infrastructure than you'll hear this morning. And I'm so proud of the role that APTA's business members have filled in the ongoing push to ramp up an industry of advocacy participation, the development of new partnerships, and the refinement of our message. In fact, this May, we're building upon this conference with a subsequent fly-in where the business members will come to DC and reinforce that message for federal investment in public transportation, which is critical to private sector jobs and hundreds of thousands of jobs around the nation. With that in mind, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker today, who's a tireless leader, dedicated much of his career to spreading the message that investing in infrastructure is the best way to enhance our nation's prosperity and quality of life. The Honorable Ed Rendell is the former governor of Pennsylvania and co-chair of Building America's Future. As governor, Rendell served as chief executive of the nation's sixth most populous state and oversaw a $27.5 billion budget. Governor Rendell's unprecedented strategic investments energized Pennsylvania's economy, revitalized communities, and protected the environment. And during his second term as the governor, he teamed up with then Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger of California and then independent Mayor Michael Bloomberg of New York to establish Building America's Future. Now Governor Rendell co-chairs this organization with former Congressman and U.S. Secretary of Transportation Ray LaHood. Building America's Future seeks to advance national vision for infrastructure investments that strengthen our cities, rural communities, focus on economic growth, global competitiveness, job creation, and environmental sustainability. Building America's Future has been a great voice for our industry, and there's no doubt that APTA looks forward to working closely with them as Congress and the administration consider an infrastructure package and the next FAST Act reauthorization. We appreciate Governor Rendell joining us today, sharing more about Building America's Future, and we hope he can also shed some light on what we can expect to see during these infrastructure debates. So please join me in welcoming Governor Ed Rendell.
I have to laugh. Jeff said I can explain what's going to happen in these coming infrastructure debates. I'm not even sure there are going to be infrastructure debates. I saw, any of you watch C-SPAN regularly? I have a confession to make. I've always had a hyperactive mind, so I have trouble falling asleep in the dark thinking about things. So I watch television to try to fall asleep, and I have to get two things. One, a program where the sound modulation doesn't change, and fortunately C-SPAN has no commercials. And secondly, it has to be boring as all get out. And C-SPAN is perfect, particularly legislative hearings. And I have to confess, I've actually fallen asleep a few times watching myself. But last night I watched, there was an unusual session in front of the Senate when 5 or 6 cabinet officials all testified at the same time. Did anybody see that? Well, I've known Elaine Chao for a while, as many of you have, and I've always thought she was an extremely pleasant woman. Not necessarily well, might as well. Not necessarily very effective, but extremely pleasant. Last night, someone asked her about Gateway, and it was like one of the horror movies. Her face changed, her demeanor changed. She was vicious talking about Gateway. The way she was talking about Gateway, you would have thought it was Watergate. I mean, it was stunning to me. I have, first of all, it's like, I always laugh. Since I left as governor, I've been on contract to NBC, CNBC, and MSNBC, and I'm always referred to as a political analyst. Well, I got embarrassed at the end of the last election because up until about October of 16, everything I said about the election was wrong. Absolutely everything. So I'm not sure that I can impart any wisdom about what's going to happen. But I will tell you this. I know all of us, and by the way, I have an extraordinary regard for your organization. In fact, I walk in here, I said, this is incredible. Look at all these people interested about infrastructure. Look at all these people coming to see me. I remember when I was a young assistant DA, the Justice Department sent me out to talk about juvenile justice to a conference of police chiefs and probation officers in Salt Lake City. And I walked into this theater, and there were 2,000 people in the audience. And I said to the moderator, I said, this is incredible, all these people coming out to hear about juvenile justice. I gave my speech, and the fellow walked me out. He said, you were very good, he said, but I've got to confess, there's a drawing for a trip to Hawaii, and you have to be present. So are we giving away anything here this morning? Well, look, as you can tell, I digress when I speak, but I'll try to get back on point. I love APTA. You guys have done great work, and you're fighting for something that really doesn't have much of a constituency. You might say, much of a constituency? Governor, we had almost 11 billion rides last year. Of course, you have a lot of ridership. You represent a lot of Americans, but who rides public transit? By and large, the people with the least amount of clout in this country. Why do you think public transit gets the short end of the stick all of the time? Because it's ridden by people who have the least amount of clout of anybody in this country. And worse, in the politically just ruinous atmosphere in Washington, D.C., it is ridden by people who more or less, my guess is probably 80% or more, live in blue states. Not a great idea if you want to get something through in Washington today. So I know that you, like all of us at Building America's Future, and Building America's Future, here I go again. I want to say that Mayor Bloomberg has been a terrific asset to us. He helped fund us for the longest period of time. He was a good spokesman for us. Governor Schwarzenegger did stuff for us in California, but his most lasting tribute to the infrastructure debate was, and this was in 2008. We had an opening press conference announcing Building America's Future in an island in a freeway in California at 10 a.m., which was still pretty scary, on a Saturday, and it was still pretty scary. Well, Governor Schwarzenegger tells a story that his 8-year-old son, the night before, had seen on his schedule infrastructure press conference. And his son asked him, Daddy, what's infrastructure? And Arnold replied, what Daddy used to blow up in the movies. And when you think about it, in 2008, that was probably as good a definition as any. The good news is that because of APTA, because of Building America's Future, because of the transportation advocacy community, Americans understand what infrastructure is. And because of it, because of the work we've done, Americans are coming around. When we first started Building America's Future, a federal gas tax increase was supported by 39 or 40% of the public. In a recent Quinnipiac poll, it was supported by 55% of the American public. So we are making progress, and people know what infrastructure is about, and they know it's more than just transportation. And they know that whether it's dams, pipelines, bridges, they know the state of the American infrastructure is woeful, woeful. So when President Trump was running against Secretary Clinton, they both talked about significant infrastructure investment. In fact, you will recall President Trump said he was going to invest $1 trillion over 10 years. and it was going to be major projects. In fact, he actually asked the 50 governors to submit transformative projects to them during the transition. And I had high hopes that this was one area where the president would do significant things, because he understood building and he understood infrastructure from the nature of what he'd done all his life. And I know for all of us, we tread lightly. And so I know the first inclination is to say, well, we commend the president for taking this first step and for coming out with a proposal. We shouldn't. I know that's the politically, I guess, safe thing to do, but we shouldn't. This proposal is a disaster. It's a joke. To use the word of the Trump administration staff, hard to pin down who the staff is at any one time, but their favorite phrase is, it's a nothing burger. Well, this is the biggest nothing burger I have ever seen. You cannot do something about transportation infrastructure, no less all of the infrastructure we have to be concerned about. You cannot do something about the transportation infrastructure without facing up to the harsh reality that the gas tax is going broke and that there's only one way to fix it. You can talk all you want about every other proposal, and we can streamline regulations, and we can do this, and we can have value capital, we can have all these nice concepts. But unless you do something about the highway transit fund, roads, bridges, highways, transit, all of it is going to go down the tubes. We have to be as clear as we can be. And we have to tell the people that. You know, the people aren't stupid. The people get it. Sometimes it takes them time, but they get it. To wit, I tried my last 4 years as governor, my second term, to get a significant increase in our gas tax. I had a Republican legislature, and I couldn't get it through. I was replaced by a moderate Republican by the name of Tom Corbett. He decided correctly that we needed a significant increase in our gas tax. And he had the Republican legislature, but we had Tea Partyites. So he called me and said, will you come up to Harrisburg and support the bill and contact all the Democratic legislators? I did, and we passed it. It increased the gas tax 32 cents over 5 years. It gave Pennsylvania the second highest gas tax in the country, behind only California. That was in April. It was right after the primary. In November, every Democrat who voted for it was opposed by a Republican who said he voted for the gas tax increase. Every Republican who voted for it was opposed by a Democrat who said she voted for the gas tax increase. Guess what happened? Every single incumbent who voted for it won. Let me repeat that. Every single incumbent who voted for a 32-cent increase in the gas tax won. New Jersey, the year after, increased its gas tax by 13 cents a gallon. In the election, the same pattern held. The challengers trashed the people who voted for it. Every single incumbent who voted for the gas tax won. Some of you may remember a wonderful Republican congressman from Ohio by the name of LaHood. He just passed away, I think, a few months ago. He once told me, at the early stages of building America's future, he said, Governor, he said, if we had a secret ballot on raising the gas tax, it would get 400 votes in the House and 85 to 90 votes in the Senate. But we don't have a secret ballot. And what we've got is a Congress of wussies. Now, there was a book that was written called A Nation of Wussies. And if you haven't read that book, I suggest you get it on Amazon. Because it talks about polarization isn't killing us. Polarization's awful, but it isn't killing us. What's killing us is everyone cares about protecting their office. It has made me, I was always an opponent of term limits for legislators. I thought it was a system that couldn't be put together correctly. It would cause chaos, et cetera. Now I think it's the only hope. When I was governor, I had people come up to me and said, Governor, you're right about education. We need to raise taxes for our schools. but I qualify for a pension in 3 years. I can't vote for it. Well, Rule 1, term limits. Rule 2, no pensions for elected officials. That solves a lot of problems. Because if you're in year 5 of an 8-year limited term and you have a tough vote, what the heck? It'll be 6 years or 8 years. What's the big difference? Cast a vote. I'm embarrassed at my profession, and my profession is politics. Second is lawyers. Lawyers are right down there in the public esteem with politicians. But I'm embarrassed with politicians because they won't cast a tough vote. They won't take any risk, even when they see data. Remember on universal background checks? You had people voting against it when newspaper polls showed that 95% of their constituents were for it. The Republican senator from New Hampshire rightly lost her seat because she voted against it when 83% of New Hampshireites were for it. Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota voted against it even though 93% of North Dakotans were for it. I mean, there's no other way out. And what we have to do is keep explaining, first to our representatives, that it's okay. It's okay to vote for something that both the Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO support. Good Lord. I wouldn't expect the Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO to agree that this is Monday. And it is Monday, isn't it? But think about it. The Chamber is for a 25-cent increase in the gas tax phased in over 5 years. Hallelujah. That produces roughly, who's here from the Chamber? $343 billion over 10 years? Is that pretty close? Does anybody, now I will give you 2 tickets to the next Cleveland Browns Super Bowl. Hey, guys, I'm with you. You pick Saquon Barkley with the first pick, and any one of the quarterbacks with the 4th pick, and you're back in business. So I'm with you. But at any event, yeah, I have to pick on some team. So, what was I talking about? Help me out. No, $343 billion over 10 years. Can anybody tell me what that $343 billion is very close to over 10 years? What it's very close to? Think hard. It was probably the most outrageous thing that's happened in tax reform in the last century. It was slipped in at the very end. Don't you remember the real estate developers tax break? $341 billion over 10 years. $341 billion in tax breaks out of the Treasury, right out of the Treasury, for 1,000 real estate developers. We're asking for $343 billion for 330 million Americans. Doesn't seem that tough. But we've got to continue to explain. The Chamber's for you. They'll stand with you. The AFL-CIO's for you. They'll stand with you. All of the transportation advocacy community will stand with you. It's okay. Look at Pennsylvania. Look at New Jersey. Look at transportation referendums. Over the last 10 years, 72% of transportation referendums, all of which call for increases in taxes or tolls, have been passed by an average of 71%. People of Charleston, reddest of the red states, have voted twice to raise their sales tax, first for redoing the Port of Charleston. Because people aren't dumb. They know the Port of Charleston is the key to their economic livelihood. Then the biggest bridge that goes into Charleston from the rest of the state, they voted to raise the sales tax for repairing the bridge. People aren't dumb. If we talk to them and explain it correctly, I've always believed, give me 34 minutes in every American household, and we'll raise the gas tax easily. And we'll have a robust, not just for transportation, we'll have a robust infrastructure bill. Because you worry about terrorism, and we all talk about terrorism. How about our electric grid? Anybody know how vulnerable that is? And if the terrorists ever get their act together, if they go to 5 locations and blow up the electric grid, America is dark for 3, 4, 5 months. Economic chaos. We're not even moving to do that. We're not even moving to do that. How many of the military have to say that infrastructure is important? Our ports are important to the military. Our roads are important to the military. Look, you and I both know that transportation infrastructure infrastructure in general, but transportation infrastructure in specific does 4 things. It improves the quality of our lives. If you were someone who goes to work every day and you drive and you're stuck in traffic for an hour because the bridge you have to get across doesn't have enough lane space to get people through, and you wait an hour in the morning, an hour at night, it's 10 hours a week. That's 500 hours. That's almost 20 days of your life that you sit in traffic. So it improves the quality of our life. It certainly improves our public safety. How many pipelines, how many bridges, how many dams have to break or blow up or explode before we do something? How many? It also improves our economy. It's vitally important how fast we move goods. Everyone in business will tell you that. The chamber will tell you that. You name it. Movement of goods is crucial. The way we can move goods from east to west is important. The whole business of the Panamax ships, the deepening of the Panama Canal, was necessitated by the fact that our rail system, our freight rail system, is a disaster. Because you can get from LA to Chicago, the western edge of the railroads in Chicago, as fast as it takes you to get from the western edge of the railroads in Chicago to the eastern edge of the rail yards. So they decided they had to get ships to take goods. They couldn't train goods from Los Angeles to the East Coast. They had to get ships that move over to the East Coast. There are 12 major East Coast ports. Only 2 of them were ready at that time to receive the Panamax ships, the depths, because we weren't dredged. Now we're dredging 2 more. But as a result, a lot of those ships are going to disembark in Canada. And when they disembark in Canada, we're missing out on longshoreman jobs and truck driving jobs. What do longshoreman jobs and truck driving jobs have in common? It's morning. You guys are alert. They pay well. You can make $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year depending on overtime. They're blue-collar jobs that pay family-sustaining wages. It's what politicians talk about as nirvana. And we're losing out because our infrastructure sucks. 14 years ago, we were #1 in the world, according to the World Economic Forum, and the quality of our infrastructure and the economic competitiveness of our infrastructure. We're now 10th and 11th. 10th and 11th in 14 years. And to think of it, we haven't had a real infrastructure revitalization program since Eisenhower proposed the interstate highway system. Nobody's looked at it comprehensively. Virtually every other of the G20 nations have been undergoing in the past decade 5 or 10-year infrastructure revitalization programs. Japan had one for $1 trillion. And everyone says $1 trillion is a lot of money. No, it isn't. You've read the American Society of Civil Engineers report, I'm sure with interest, as I have. They gave us a D- for our infrastructure and said that if we spent $2 trillion in the next 10 years, above and beyond what we're spending now, and when I say we, it's federal, state, local, private. If we spend $2 trillion above and beyond what we're doing now, it will take our infrastructure from D- to B-, to fair. Want to build a real high-speed rail line? We can't do it. We can't even come close to do it. Want to have major projects that improve freight rail? We can do things at the margin, but we can't do it. Do you know how many more people are going to be living in the Northeast Corridor by 2040? Another 20 million. Where are they going to go? How are they going to get from New York to Washington, New York to Baltimore, or Philly to Boston? On I-95? It's time. We've got to talk sense to the people we represent. And we've got to tell them, you've got to give our legislators a permission slip. It's okay. We're not going to vote against you. We've proven it in Pennsylvania. We've proven it in New Jersey. We've proven it on referendums. We're not going to vote against you if you raise our taxes on this. When I was governor, I inherited about a $2.2 billion deficit from my predecessor. I also wanted to end the fact that Pennsylvania was one of only 9 states that didn't contribute a nickel to pre-K and early childhood education. So I raised $2.7 billion in taxes my first year, second highest tax increase in Pennsylvania's history. I was the first governor, since Pennsylvania's had 2-term governors since 1970, to raise taxes in his first year. Everyone thought I was cooked. My opponent spent $16 million in the general election of 2006, essentially saying I raised the second biggest tax increase in Pennsylvania history. I won that election by 21 points in a decidedly purple state, 21 points, because people aren't dumb. They knew they got something in return for that increase. They knew it was necessary. People aren't dumb. Simple as that. So, if I were to give you a charge, I would say, go out and tell people we need a real transportation bill. We need $1 trillion of federal spending. Oh, and by the way, the Democrats unrolled a transportation bill that puts $1 trillion of government spending into the next 10 years. That's good. Except they took it by rolling back most of the tax cuts in the Republican tax reform bill. The 39 to 37% for the high wage earners, the estate tax, the alternative minimum tax. Well, I have more chance of waking up tomorrow and combing my hair in a pompadour than that bill does. Getting passed. That's as illusory. That's as big a nothing burger as the president's bill. Look, we have to demand our folks get serious. And get serious means raising the gas tax. It means a whole lot of other things, too. And you know them and I know them. It means giving public transportation its due, because we're going to have millions, tens and tens of millions of people more living in this country, and we cannot do it without public transportation. We cannot do it. We can't starve public transportation. So we've got to deliver that message. And we've got to really go back to, and some of you have heard me say this before, but we really got to go back to our roots. You know, if you look at the history of this country, and I've had the great experience, when I left office, I headed up the Capitol campaign for the Museum of the American Revolution that we just built in Philadelphia, just opened last April. And I got to know a lot more. I had known some, but I got to know a lot more about what the Founding Fathers did and about the war and about everything. We should never have gone to war against the British. We were a nation of shopkeepers and farmers going up against the greatest fighting machine, both Army and Navy, that the world had ever known. We had no business. It was like Appalachian State beating Michigan. Or it was like watching the NCAA tournament over the last 4 days. We had no business winning the war. And there was something unique about the American Revolution. It was led by the richest people in the colonies. Unlike any other revolution in the history of the world, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Armenian Revolution, always led by leaders of the poorest, most bedraggled citizens, the ones who had nothing to lose. But our founders had everything to lose. In fact, what does the Declaration say? It says, we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Do you think anyone in the Russian Revolution had a fortune? Of course not. And they also knew the stakes. They knew if they lost, and they were likely to lose, they would be hung. John Hancock was asked after he, as president of the convention, he signed the Declaration first, and he signed in such large script. One of the delegates asked him, John, why did you make your signature so large? And Hancock said, so King George can see it and hang me first. They knew exactly what the stakes were. And all through our history, This country has prospered and grown because we've been willing to invest in our future. Thomas Jefferson gave the go-ahead to build the Erie Canal, even though the politicians said it cost too much money and the engineers said it wouldn't work. But he knew it was necessary to open up commerce to the Midwest. He built it, and the rest was history. Abraham Lincoln, fighting the Civil War, understood that for America to grow, we needed a transatlantic rail system. And he gave the orders to begin building the transatlantic rail system that made this country a true country from sea to shining sea. Dwight Eisenhower, after World War II, knew that there was going to be an explosion and prosperity, but to make that prosperity grow and to give people economic opportunity everywhere, we had to build the interstate highway system. They invested in our growth. And the last thing you got to tell our citizens is that when you pay for infrastructure, you are investing. When you pay for infrastructure, you're not spending money, you're investing. I once, when I was governor, I was on a Sunday show, and I said something critical about a statement that was made by the then ranking member of the House of the House Ways and Means Committee, a fellow from Indiana by the name of Mike Pence. And so Fox TV, not to avoid controversy, invited Congressman Pence and myself on the next week. And they let him go first, and he said, we can't spend money, we can't do this, we can't raise taxes. And it was my turn, and I said, Congressman, I understand what you said, and you seem like a nice guy to me. No, I said, you seem like a reasonable guy to me. In truth, you didn't sound like a reasonable guy to me. But I've done enough of those television shows that you have to be the nice guy. So I said, Congressman, you seem like a reasonable guy to me. Would you tell our audience how we're going to maintain our infrastructure in safe working condition if we don't spend money, if we don't invest money to maintain it? And Congressman Pence, Vice President Pence, is a smart guy. But for maybe 10 seconds, which is eons on television, he didn't say anything. Finally, he said, there you Democrats go again using the word invest when you really mean spend. No, Congressman, we mean invest. The Hoover Dam was built, anybody, for Browns tickets? Come on, you Clevelanders. What year did the Hoover Dam open? 33. That's almost 100 years ago. It's still providing benefits. It still provides electricity to most Western states. When we invest in infrastructure, we're investing in long-term assets. Look, I'm in favor of food stamps, and food stamps got many middle-class families through the huge recession we had. But food stamp spending is over in 1 year, and you have to do it all over again. You build something like the Hoover Dam, like the Gateway Project. You build something, and it has benefits for decades and decades and decades and decades. It better, because most of the commuter railroad bridges in Philadelphia are over 100 years old. It better last for a long time, but we're in trouble. You need to explain that to our folks, too. We're building assets that have long-term life. Truth be told, we need a federal capital budget. Every political subdivision in this country has a capital budget. Every county, every city, we need a capital budget. Thank you for that, but you totally wasted whatever energy necessary to. Because that won't happen either. That won't happen either. Maybe. Look, here's my prediction. Nothing will happen next year. They'll do $10 billion, I'm told, is in the this year's budget bill for infrastructure. The Trump administration will say that's down payment on our $20 billion a year pledge. It'll do nothing. As you know, transit, Amtrak, a lot of things got cut. The gas, the Highway Trust Fund continues to go broke. They'll do nothing of any substance. And then 19 will depend on the election. If the Democrats were to win one or both houses, I think they could get through a bill, particularly if they win both houses, that had significant spending in it. And that if they had the guts, and right now there's no sign that we have the guts, but there's an election coming up in six months. But if we had the guts, it would include a gas tax increase. And they'd stand with the chamber and with the AFL-CIO and with all of us and raise the gas tax. And if they did that, President Trump would sign it. I have no doubt he would sign it. Because in his heart of hearts, he wants to do something about infrastructure. Because infrastructure is his bag. He wants transformative projects. He wants to say that because of my presidency, this was done, this was built, this was repaired. He wants to do it. He just doesn't have the courage to do it and doesn't have the know-how to do it. But present a bill on his desk that does it, he will sign it. He will not veto it. So that's my hope for us, and Lord knows we better do it, because Ronald Reagan raised the gas tax. How many of you believe me when I say Ronald Reagan raised the gas tax? Raise your hands. Well, you know that, right? Well, I was on Show Me Hannity my last year as governor, and we were talking about the gas tax, and I told him that Ronald Reagan not only raised the gas tax, but raised 11 different taxes during his 8 years as president. Sean Hannity said, no, he didn't. I said, Sean, yes, he did. You can look it up. No, he didn't. Sean, he raised the gas tax 5 cents a gallon. No, he didn't. He just kept saying, no, he didn't. But in fact, he raised the gas tax, and he said something that was extraordinarily relevant. And we should tell our folks that and tell them that Ronald Reagan said it. He said, why would we put off doing something today when to do it 5 years down the road is going to be twice as expensive? Bingo. The longer we wait, the more tragedies will occur. The longer we wait, we'll fall behind economically. The longer we wait, we'll miss out on having 5, 10 million people back to work in well-paying jobs. The longer we wait, our quality of life will go down. Let's get this done. And look, we can't bitch. We have to, each and every person here has to go back home, talk to your Rotarians, talk to your Elks, talk to your Kiwanis groups. Tell them what's at stake. And tell your legislators. Talk to them and say, look at Pennsylvania, look at New Jersey, look at the referendums. People understand. They're not going to vote against you. They're not going to vote you out of office. Look, it's important. If we want to be a great country, and we are a great country, but if we want to stay great, this is something we have to do. We have no choice. We were built by risk takers who were patriots. We've gotten away from that, a long way away from it. The time is now to get it back. And if our legislators, our leaders won't do it, it's up to us. So thanks for the work you guys do. But the next year and a half, we've got to shout from the highest of heights. We've got to be aggressive. We've got to spread the message everywhere. And for me, this has been a 20-year quest. I was head of a group called Rebuild America. I succeeded Bob Lanier, the mayor of Houston, back in the 90s. And this is on my bucket list. Now, I want to see a robust infrastructure revitalization plan. It was number 2 on my bucket list. The Eagles winning the Super Bowl was number 1.